Hey guys, welcome to What's Over More This. My name is Jason, and I've got a thought for you that I'm just going to share while kind of sitting here because it's kind of windy out. Hopefully this comes through okay. We'll see. But anyhow, I have been studying the Constitution again and again and again regarding the powers, the military powers of the Constitution. So first off, let's go ahead and establish that there is exclusivity clarified in the Constitution. In Article 1, Section 1, all legislative powers granted herein shall be vested in the Congress, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing off the top of my head while watching my animals feed here in peace. So all, the word all is the key one. All legislative powers are vested in Congress, nobody else. Okay. When you go to Article 2, it says the executive powers shall be vested. It doesn't say all. When you go to Article 3, the judicial powers shall be vested in one Supreme Court and whatsoever lesser courts that Congress establishes, right? Again, no exclusivity clarified there. When you go to Article 6, it says, Article 6, Clause 2, this Constitution and the laws made in pursuance of it and the treaties made in pursuance of it shall be the supreme law of the land when in conflict basically with state laws. And so, and the judges shall be bound by these, okay, whenever in conflict with the state laws. So, we have now three things that are called the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, according to Article 6, Clause 2. The laws then are listed next, which would be then, of course, the Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 process. And then the treaties, which would be then, of course, the Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 process. Those are all part of the supreme law of the land. Now, that said then, the Constitution is declaring itself to be the supreme law of the land. It's declaring itself, therefore, to be a law. Is it done through a legislative process? Because, again, all legislative powers granted in the Constitution are exclusively in a Congress. Well, let's see here. So the Constitution itself is done through the Article 7 process. So that's neither here nor there. That's the pre-existence prior to the existence of the Constitution. But let's look at Article 5, the ability to amend to the Constitution or create additional Constitution. It requires both houses of Congress, period. Even when a state, the Convention of States is called for or applied for, it has to be called by the federal Congress. So, okay, so that's definitely a legislative process. Then we know the Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 process is definitely a legislative process. Okay, what about Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2? It's not complete without the Senate. Okay, so it is fair then to say that the Constitution itself is a law, right? So, because it's created by way of a legislative process, okay? And it declares itself to be the law. So, two reasons to believe it's a law. Okay, the exclusivity, again, legislative powers belong strictly to Congress. That's it. Okay. Let's look then and see where else exclusivity is declared. Not really exclusivity, but a stronger restriction. There are restrictions in Article 1, Section 10, additional restrictions in Article 1, Section 9, restrictions on the state in Article 1, Section 10, restrictions on the federal government in Article 1, Section 9, or just general restrictions, maybe perhaps we could say. And then there is the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that the power is not delegated by this Constitution to the federal government, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people. Okay, so that's not exclusivity either, because it leaves it open either way. It's more of a hands-off. It's a restriction, period. If it's not listed in the Constitution, it doesn't exist with the federal government in any one of the branches whatsoever. Okay, so now, with that in mind, if it is reserved to the federal government or delegated to the federal government, and it does exist, and it falls either under the Constitution, in other words, a constitutional promise guaranteed, not a constitutional power granted that the gaps haven't yet been filled in, but a constitutional promise guaranteed, or if it falls under the just the power is granted, that is reserved then to the federal government. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at, and I wouldn't even say exclusively reserved, because it says delegated. So it seems to be that at least the federal government has the power to do something about it. And if it's a promise guaranteed, well, it seems like the federal government better darn well do something about it. And with that attitude in mind towards the Constitution, I'm going to look for some the opposite of checks and balances, but backup plans, okay, which is something I don't think we talk about enough in the Constitution. So say, for example, the states have the power to apply to the federal government to send troops for domestic violence, for insurrection, right? However, they don't have the exclusive power of dealing with it, if you ask me. There's a take care clause granted there, okay? And that take care clause is granted to the president. It says the president shall take care that the laws are faithfully executed. Now, I was just talking with my wife this morning. What do you say if someone has a job that they've been given, they're supposed to be doing it, and they're not getting it done? You're ultimately the manager that's in charge of everything. You say, fine, I'll take care of it. That's the take care clause. Okay? So there's supposed to be a guarantee against domestic or violence, or basically domestic tranquility is supposed to be guaranteed. Okay, then defense, common defense, especially from invasion, which invasion, if you think about it, an invasion can be people, but that's not the only kind of invasion. And where it's not clarified, it's not clarified. It doesn't say military invasion. It doesn't say human invasion. And even still the same. So you have any kind of invasive content wanting to enter the United States. I would say those specifically for subversive purposes, obviously. At that point, you are talking about then the potential of someone to launch a cannon. So historically, there was the 3-mile rule, right? That if enemy ships were within 3 miles of the shore of the United States, they no longer had any requirements for the land-based forces of the United States to hold back. They could fire upon them, okay? Because there's the threat of invasion at that point, right? And the threat of invasion was sufficient. Okay. Why am I getting to all this? If you look at Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, it gives Congress the power to declare war. Now, the Constitution is supposed to guarantee protection from invasion. It's supposed to guarantee common defense. It's supposed to guarantee these kind of things, right? So then, can that possibly be exclusive to Congress? No, it says they declare war. Well, if they declare war, that's through the Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 process. So say, for example, Congress notices something, the president isn't dealing with it. Congress says, fine, we're declaring war. Now we're telling the president he has to go deal with it. Other than that, if there's an ongoing threat, the president is the ongoing commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy at all times, and the militia when called into actual service. But the Army and the Navy, they have voluntarily signed up to work for that branch. They have taken their contracts, their oaths. It's not an optional duty, and if the president sees something going on, he doesn't have to wait for Congress. He's expected to deal with it. He is the ongoing commander-in-chief. Now, you could say, well, that's not the way some of the founders said it. Yes, but it's the way some of the founders did say it, right? And it's besides the point. It's what the text says, right? So now this is, I can't help but notice this. Then that makes Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, not the primary plan, but the backup plan. In other words, if the president isn't noticing it, Congress tells him, hey, we're making a law, you have to go deal with this nation or this group of pirates or this or that. But if the president has already noticed it and dealt with it, that declaration of war is optional, based on what I see in the text of the Constitution itself. Now, if Congress then thinks that the president is out of line for going to war, can they override his use of the Army and Navy? No. No, he is the commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy. They cannot take that from him with a simple Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 process. So there was a recent attempt to actually stop the president from using the Army and Navy. That's not what I see as a power granted to Congress. He is at all times. This force that has voluntarily signed up to be part of our Army and Navy at all times answers to him, as long as it is constitutional. And so when it is common defense, period, they answer to him. This is weird. I'm very surprised to find myself saying this, but I have cross-referenced and cross-referenced and cross-referenced, and that is all I find, is that period, the president is expected to do this at all times. Now, can Congress put the president in check? Land-based, yes, they can, once every 2 years. Once every 2 years, they can say, well, we're going to defund the Army. Okay? Can the president call forth the militia on his own? No, absolutely not. Okay? All he has command of at all times is whatever army the Congress has already funded. Okay? Okay, so what about the Navy? The Congress has to maintain the Navy at all times. There is no 2-year limit. However, a true Navy is sea-based forces. It is not land-based forces. So what do we have going on in Iran right now in the Strait of Hormuz? The president isn't pulling the troops back, the Navy off at all. And he shouldn't. If he feels like there's an actual threat, his constitutional obligation is common defense. Especially someone who has declared themselves to be enemies of us, wants us gone, and is saying we're working on nuclear weapons, which is, with these intercontinental ballistic missiles, that's potential invasion of the United States via something sent through the air to be invasive into the body of the United States, and not an unnatural invasion into the United States. And I think I should probably clarify that, an unnatural invasion. In other words, a human-based invasion, whether they themselves are the humans entering the land of the United States, or their simple projectiles are what's entering the United States. So final conclusion, you guys. The Navy has to exist, period, at all times, and the president has to be the commander-in-chief of them at all times, and whoever has voluntarily signed up for it at all times has to answer to him. Okay? The Army exists at all times too, but only funded up to the level that Congress funds it every 2 years. Can the Congress back it off? Yes. So anybody who signs up for the Army, you probably should know that your job potentially has the chance of going obsolete within 2 years, okay? According to the Constitution itself. The militia only answers to the president when actually called into service, and it's only Congress who has the power to call them into service. If the president fails to deal with an international threat that he sees against the United States, or that Congress sees and the president doesn't see it, Congress can compel him by way of an Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 process to declare war. And then the president has to deal with that declaration of war. Okay? If Congress gets tired of the way that the president is using the Army, they can defund the Army every 2 years, and they can reduce it down, and he is stuck with whatever they leave him. If Congress has called forth the militia, they can obviously then reverse the calling forth the militia at any time. Okay? And then the Navy, they have to maintain it, period. They have to maintain it. The Constitution requires it. It's not optional. It has to be maintained. Okay? With this perspective in mind, I have no option but to see the Congress as the backup plan, not the primary plan. And I know that Joseph Smith said the Constitution is not a law, it's only the powers to make laws. But I'm reading it like a person who reads the Constitution as a citizen. An honest reader of the written document, would say, sorry, once you actually read it enough, cross-reference it enough, get to where the whole thing is a big picture in your head, there is no other way to see it. A guarantee is not exclusive to Congress. A guarantee is spread also to the president. Okay, where it is a constitutional guarantee, whether or not Congress has filled in the gaps with legislation, the president has the duty, the take care duty, to make sure that the constitutional promises are kept There is no other reasonable way to interpret this whatsoever. And then where where there is then an actual legitimate need for common defense, right? An actual legitimate need to prevent invasion, an actual legitimate need to deal with actual domestic violence, right? Actual domestic violence, and I'll get into that another day. I know what a lot of you are probably thinking, because that's a whole other subject where you need to be able to thoroughly cross-reference the Constitution. Where there is that legitimate need, the president should be responsive with or without a declaration of war from Congress. And where Congress sees that the president is failing to respond, they should compel him by exercising the powers granted to him in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, and then use the Article 1, Section 7, Clause 2 process to basically declare war and demand that the president carry it out, okay? If they feel that there's more troops needed than are volunteering, the calling forth of the militia is the exclusive power of Congress, okay? As best as I can tell. I'm going to admit, I haven't studied that one a ton yet. I'll have to dig into that one more, but I'm 90% sure the only mention of calling forth the militia, it is strictly a duty of the Congress. Now, states, when you have Article 1, Section 10, there's some kind of prevention of states from calling forth the militia for themselves, except for when they're actually invaded or something to that effect. So basically, even the states have the power to call forth the militia, but only to prevent their citizens from dealing with an invasion that the president nor Congress has noticed yet. Okay, and I have to go back and review that one too now that I'm thinking about it off the top of my head. This is me out here feeding my animals, but this much I know: the Navy exists at all times and has to be maintained. The commander-in-chief of it at all times, not on some occasions, is the president. And a war powers resolution cannot make that cease to exist. And his obligation, his take care obligation to the supreme law of the land, which is Article 6, Clause 2, which is the Constitution, wherever Congress has not filled in the gaps, but there are promises guaranteed. And then where Congress has filled in the gaps, he has to execute those too. And then where the treaties have been made, which include the Senate participating, he has to. If he does not, he is actually violating his oath of office. Okay, so yeah, the president needs to know what the promises are guaranteed in the Constitution. But one of the obvious ones is domestic tranquility, prevent invasion, common defense, all stuff relevant to the Iran war, and to top it off, United States territorial integrity, which when a military ship, anything like that is out on the seas, right? We could look into that further in the future, but as far as I understand it, that is legitimate United States territory. While it is traveling on the open seas, right, it is still legitimate United States territory. It belongs to the United States. If a ship of the United States is invaded, if a fort of the United States, a military base of the United States is invaded, anything like that is invaded, even if it's overseas, that is legitimate United States territory, and the president has the take care clause to deal with it, right? Not wait for Congress at all. I've said again and again, I think that Jefferson is our most important president, just because he's part of that founding era where they were still trying to figure out, wait, what exactly did we all ratify? Even though they knew it really well, right? And so I think for that awkward time when they were trying to figure it out, again and again, he and Madison kept coming back to the text, and making sense out of it, making these cross references. And so I'm sorry, the more I think about it, the 1973 War Powers Resolution is unconstitutional because it attempts to take away a constitutionally guaranteed and granted power of the president and to his obligation, take care obligation to a constitutional guarantee, and tells him there's limits of how long he can deal with that constitutional guarantee. And I see no evidence whatsoever in the Constitution that the Congress is allowed to limit his take care clause. Okay? The only way they can limit his take care clause is every 2 years They can pull back on the Army, but they have to maintain the Navy at all times. They can choose not to call forth the militia at all. Volunteer soldiers are volunteer soldiers. They are under the command of the president at all times, and he always has that take care clause at all times. He has that Navy at all times. Navy at all times. And even the Army at all times, just depending on how much it's funded or not funded by Congress. This is the truth of what the Constitution says. Someone might say founders were against a standing army. That never made it into the Constitution. Instead, what made it into the Constitution is that 2-year limitation. However, there is no option of completely making the armies become obsolete. Reading the Articles of Confederation could be instructive on that. The Articles of Confederation said only maintaining sufficient army to keep the forts in operative order, right? So, and that's what has to obviously happen even more so with the Navy, keeping everything in operative order. But the decision was, after Shays' Rebellion and other stuff like that, that not having a standing army and a standing Navy was a complete failure. And that they had to have it. And they had to have an energetic chief executive, single unitary chief executive, as they say. Period. They had to have it. By the way, does the judicial branch have any jurisdiction over this at all? Only over offenses against the laws that are legitimately passed. Can the judicial branch actually legislate anything regarding this? No, they cannot. To follow the precedent or the previous decisions of previous judges is only an act of creating legitimacy, which is appropriate, but not constitutionally required. The Constitution requires strictly prioritizing the Constitution, the laws, and the treaties, not previous decisions of previous judges. However, the courts would cease to seem very legitimate if they never paid attention to the decisions of previous judges. However, those decisions of previous judges should never override the actual text of the Constitution, period, at all, and the actual text of laws should only be interpreted where there are kind of vague or kind of non-specific descriptors, such as unreasonable or things like that, right? So, and then that's where the courts create what I believe are called tests, and then those tests are typically honored by any other judges that come after them. But they cannot be true legislation because all legislative powers granted in the Constitution are in a Congress, period. That's all there is to it. The president cannot fill in the gaps for weights and measures. He cannot fill in the gaps for how to handle intellectual property rights, things like that. However, the president definitely has that take care clause to the promises guaranteed in the Constitution with or without congressional action. Okay? And so again, with that guarantee in mind, Van Buren was one of the worst presidents we ever had, for example. Okay, he did not notice Article 4, Section 2, Clause 1, right? And just say, hey, with or without these governors calling for me, with or without Congress calling for me, I need to defend the Mormons in Missouri, right? That's what he should have done. That's the way the Constitution was set up. The Constitution was literally motivated by such issues. And to say that it didn't deal with such type issues doesn't make any sense at all. And the text of it doesn't bear it out. I don't care what any other founding fathers said. The quotes of founding fathers do not override the ratified text. Okay, so this is what I've come to. Yes, the 1973 military war powers resolution is unconstitutional, and the president should choose to resume hostilities in Iran. He would absolutely be justified, according to his oath, especially as it's related to common defense and prevention of invasion and other issues. So that it's not optional. Now, where he's doing it just to exercise unnecessary authority, right? At that point, the Constitution is probably being violated. I will have to think about that more. We do not have a non-aggression requirement in our Constitution. That's the honest truth of it that I can think of. But again, clearly, always the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, always obligated to the constitutional guarantees with or without Congress, always the commander-in-chief of whatever portion of the army remains funded. And whenever the militia is called into actual force, then he is the commander-in-chief there too. But if they are not called into force, he cannot call them unilaterally into force. And if Congress declares war, he has no option. He has to, by his take care clause, follow that declaration of war made. So that's what I've got. I believe I have just now connected all the dots of the Constitution for you correctly. If you think you can prove it to me wrong, please go ahead. I'd be really... But if all you've got are quotes from the founders and quotes from the Supreme Court and stuff like that, there's no point. Everything I just now referenced is in the Constitution itself. So thanks for listening, guys. See ya.